choose to start reading blogs?
Well, let me say first, I'm not a blogger. I'm a lurker and an occasional commenter, but not a blogger, and I don't think I ever will be. I started reading blogs in December of 2002 when the daughter of a friend of mine, Erica Brooks, she was a senior at the University of Missouri, Columbia, and she went to London for a semester on an internship to work with a magazine. She's a journalism major. And she gave me her blog site address and said she was going to keep us up with all her adventures in London. So I started reading about her times, her adventures, her thoughts, and I've known Erica since she was born, so it was a wonderful thing for me just to kind of experience just more of her growth and more of her. So it was a very personal experience for me, and that's how I started. Now, how I got to someone else, I think after that, I didn't.
You weren't subscribing to a blog or using a special software. You just went to her website and read her site.
Right. And I went about maybe every other day. She wrote maybe every day or maybe every other day. It was like a diary for her. And so it just was really neat for me to keep up with her. But I learned that you could even do that through hers. And I'm not sure how I got on another. It may have had to do with the Gulf War, and maybe I read an article, or I don't know how I got to my first Milblogs that I started reading several years ago in the Gulf War. I read lots and lots. I kept up with the war, having major interest in that situation. I read blogs written by enlisted people, officers in the Navy, in the Air Force, in the Army. I read blogs written by soldiers in Afghanistan, in Kuwait, in Iraq, at home before they left, by their wives as they're gone. And I felt like I kind of got an idea and a feeling of all the different points of view and some of the fears, the after actions. I never read anybody's blog that really was giving away operational security that I ever knew of. Some were just wonderful, wonderful writers who obviously are very gifted young men with prose. And
all men?
No, but mostly, but not all, no. Two in particular women I've read, and one is out, and I still read hers occasionally. She's out of the Army. She was blown up by an IED and recovered, but then her time was up. She was enlisted. Maybe three women, I guess. One is an officer, one was enlisted in Afghanistan, and one in Iraq. And of course, they're almost all young, not all really young. I've read some by chaplains. I've read some by senior officers, some blogs that were written just for family members, but I assume if they make them public and not password protected, that they're for anybody. Many Milbloggers link to each other, and one that I read from the beginning was Black 5, and now Black 5 is Matthew Burden, who has written the book and published the book, The Blogs of War.
Was he anonymous when he was Black 5?
Yes.
In theater?
Yes, he was. You knew he'd been a paratrooper, you knew certain things, but then he got out. He lives in Chicago, he's a civilian now. But he kept up, and he sort of developed not an organization, but a central point where you could go and learn about other blogs and link to others.
Like a portal or just a hot list?
He linked to a lot, and he would say, read this today because so-and-so's written about so-and-so. And I'd say most of the bloggers were anonymous, but not all. Occasionally somebody was offensive.
Like sort of coarse, maybe you think Army humor kind of?
Or a little bit of...
bathroom humor?
Not humor, but things that I think locker room talk maybe. Or
more
something.
Information than you really
I
wanted.
think maybe only two people out of hundreds I've read were that way. And one of them, in fact, was censored by the Army. He wrote things offensive to anyone. Some of the bloggers say, and I think this is pretty cool, say, I must remember that I'm writing this so that my boss, my mother, and my grandmother can read it. And most bloggers keep that in mind, and they give good information.
And many mothers do read the blogs of their children.
That's why most of the Milbloggers blog for their families.
Right.
It's actually so they'll and all stuff.
And for people who don't know you and know your background, can you tell a little bit about your interest in things military and family issues and things like that? Because I think your role as the military visitor, I don't know, is that a common thing in military communities?
Well,
military
you know, and you may know from listening to Wes's blog that we were an Air Force family. My husband was career Air Force, and when he retired from the Air Force and became a banker, but military is dear to us. And when we moved to Manhattan, and we had lived here for 10 years, I guess, when the Gulf War broke out, and there was an organization affiliated with the Presbyterian Church then that we started. This is too long. No, let's go.
Well, you don't have to go into detail, but just basically you supported military families
and
were closely tied to families whose husbands and mothers, husbands and wives, mothers and fathers were deploying, going around the world, and sometimes just coming here from other places. Right. So, and that's an important connection because, I don't know, unless you live in a military community or you know people in the military, you don't always think of the family side of military and the personal side. I think people read the news and they read the headlines and they think about actions that these instruments of policy do, but the human face isn't really there.
And that's something that almost every one of the bloggers will say at some point, and maybe many times, this is so much harder on my family than it is on me. I'm here, wherever he may be. I'm here. I have my brothers in arms. We take care of each other. We talk to each other. The people this is the hardest on are our wives, our parents, our children.
Right.
So that's, I just have an interest in that, and I do a lot here in my life now to support military families in any way I can. But that doesn't have anything.
Well, I'm going to ask one more question about milblogging, and then, anyway, and then I want to talk about cooking and a little technical about how you've grown in how you read and consume blogs. How do you think...
I do consume them.
You do. You're a consumer. And you're also a participator, like you said, a lurker and a commenter. How did the views that you read about on blogs inform your thoughts and your ideas about the war and about what has happened? You know, how is that different than if you had just been reading the newspaper and watching the television?
Totally different. It's completely different because what the soldiers and airmen say, no matter where they are, their stories are totally different from what the news says. They talk about the successes. They talk about the children. They talk about the schools. They talk about the Iraqis who have them for dinner or who invite them. The people who give them gifts. I mean, I remember one who wrote about invited to an Iraqi's house and he had to eat the head of a sheep because it was the most honor they could give him. And so they put pictures on their blogs, and you see here are these Iraqis, these beautiful children, in this dusty place. And the soldiers are wearing their full battle rattle. It must be frightening. To me, it makes me think like a stormtrooper would...
Well, the firemen, we were talking the other day about how scary it is for a fireman when the house is burning and the kids are so scared. Yeah. And
it must be, but they're not. And these soldiers, and of course most of them are and Marines. Oh, I didn't even mention Marines. Lots of Marines blog. And theirs is a different experience from the Army. But they're just young, honorable people who want to be there, who volunteered to be there, many who volunteer to go back again and again, who know they're doing the right thing. Their heart is in it. Now, there are a few who are not, and I've read some of those, and some of those blog too. And I've read some of those. But, I mean, those people will get out. And occasionally somebody will be stop lost or something, but they're really, really in the minority. And most of the milbloggers are very offended by some of those people who, why'd you volunteer? You knew what you were getting into. You know, you knew by the time you were here.
So reading milblogs has really given you an insight not only into the facts, but into the hearts and minds of these soldiers.
I guess that's what it's all about. That's where...
And you know, there's a song, and I forget who it's by, that's popular in country music now, by this guy who did serve, and he sings really about just, you know, how blessed he is to be an American, but how horrible Iraq is. The streets of Baghdad are terrible. I feel so sorry for those kids. And, I mean, you know, travel the world. It's amazing how fortunate, you know, many folks are in the United States to have, you know, clean running water and electricity that doesn't go off every once in a while. I mean, but anyway, I think that's a really important perspective to get on the world and on what's happening, you know, in particularly in the Middle East, because of that human face. And that's why I think blogging and podcasting and the opportunity to hear voices, because you know people that you wouldn't have known otherwise, and you know them at a different level than even if you had heard them speak or present.
Well, this makes me think of the one that I had read for so long, since he started, one of my first bloggers that I read. Then when he came back, he's from California. He happens to now be in law school. And he came back, and his father provided him the opportunity to take. He's one of the few that I really responded to, that I would comment to or write comments on. And his father provided him a car and gas and money to take a coast-to-coast trip.
That was one of the first podcasts I recorded. I think that was the summer
to say thank you to the people who had supported him. He was sending packages, and he was not anonymous. And he was a public affairs.
Was his name Chris?
Chris Messick.
Yeah.
He was a public affairs soldier. And so he traveled through. He came, and he made a little detour to come through Manhattan, Kansas. It just so happened most of his family were visiting us then. And they had Sunday dinner with us one day, and then moved on to the next, headed back to California. And he's in law school now. He's out in law school.
Yeah, and that was like one of my first podcasts, was him talking about his experiences.
Very, very personal to have that. And then there's another fellow who's been out for a while. If I respond to somebody, I kind of feel something close geographically. This fellow was from Oklahoma, and he went to Oklahoma State, and and there's another one that I was really it's funny to say I was involved with because I've never met him. But he was from Kansas City, and he was a Royals fan. The Royals are so horrible, and he wrote all the time.
But you feel connected to these people.
Connected. When there's some kind of a commonality or something. And there's another one who I don't know how I linked to him way back, and he was a tanker in the Army, and he's been out for a long time, but he was linked in some way to some of the Milbloggers. Well, he's from southern Louisiana and southwest Louisiana, where Rita came, not from New Orleans, and his blog site's mostly Cajun. I just love his blog. I just get recipes from him. And he sails. He talks about Cajun culture, which is in my background. He talks about how horrible New Orleans is, the Louisiana government, and how people in his part of Louisiana pick up themselves and take care of themselves and don't wait for the government to take care of them. And he's a great cook. Okay, so I hooked to him. Maybe that's one way. And then I don't know how I hook to everybody.
Well, they link to each other, and they're amplifiers for the ideas of each other, right? So when they pick up on an idea or somebody who's saying a message that they want to share or reflect on, it's this organic web of connections.
And maybe I got started on cooking blogs because you kept telling me how to blog.
Right.
I think that's how I started finding out there were cooking blogs.
Good.
You kept telling me how to blog, and I kept saying, no, I don't have anything to blog about. I'm not going to blog.
But I knew that there were all these people, who love different kinds of gourmet cooking, love Cajun cooking, and
so then I had quite a lot that I just love, and they're all over the world of food bloggers. Some are professional chefs, although they're a little. I like to read them, and they have pretty pictures. And most food bloggers put pictures on it. It's called food porn.
What?
Food porn. And they'll have beautiful pictures of their food.
I have never heard of that.
Dish of whatever. But
so that won't get through the school filter because it has the word porn in it. It's food porn.
But there's just pictures that some bloggers will say. They'll title the name of the blog will be food porn, like red beans and rice or something. It'll be pictures of red beans or something. But so food bloggers that I read every day. Wes downloaded me a new aggregator that I use mostly for. I don't use it any for my Milbloggers.
Is it Newsfire? Is that what we did?
Mm-hmm. Free. Yeah. And I love it. It works great. And so I'm really it's culture. I've always been interested in intercultural exploration, being
intercultural exchanges with students.
With students and everything. And so I've hooked up to a number of food bloggers. I think my first one maybe was in Israel. In fact, I'm sure she was. And I don't know. Oh, that had to do with education. Are we finished?
No, we're good.
Had to do with education, and she would blog about holiday food in Israel. She was a teacher.
Wow.
An elementary teacher, and so she would put recipes on or what she would do. And I think I haven't read her in a long time. But I think maybe that was one of my first food bloggers, and that got me to knowing that there were food bloggers too. She and Elsa Case. And then, so now the blogs that link to each other, they're in California, or they're all, now I don't know, but a couple of food bloggers. I have 50 they're mostly food bloggers on my new aggregator.
Wow, I didn't know you had that many. How often would you say you subscribe to a new one? Is it kind of rare to find somebody new, or
I don't know.
like once a week, or 10
I
times
eliminate
a week,
them too if they're not regular bloggers. Subscribe, or maybe I'll read them a while and they're not talking about something I really want. And I found out then about all the podcasts, the wonderful cooking.
You've listened to cooking podcasts?
Oh, I subscribe to a lot.
I didn't know that.
Like Whole Foods has one, and
really,
and a lot of the television chefs have them. And then you can see things, and some television stations have them that are just, you just go into iTunes and get the, I don't know if it's called cookery or food. I think maybe just
the
food.
Category anyway in the iTunes.
And there are some of them are not anything I'm interested in, but some of them are really good. They show you, they demonstrate.
So let me ask you this. Do you have any idea how many meals you've prepared that have been influenced by things you've read on blogs or podcasts you've listened to?
Oh, dinner last night.
A common occurrence?
Oh, common. Several times a week.
I mean, that's a big life impact if you think about the food that you eat and your family
Well,
eats.
and I'm in a gourmet group and a women's lunch group, Korean cookery group, and I would say lots of what I cook from those. Rules for both of those are things that you couldn't have tried before. So, yeah, I always. But I copy them because it's hard to find them again. I copy the recipe I want to try, and paste it on a sticky, and then come back. And if I try it on the sticky, I throw it away if I don't like it, or if
you
I
have
like
more
it, then
stickies
I put
on your computer than anyone I know.
And if they're yellow, they mean they're recipes.
Oh, really? They're color coded. That's very good.
Yeah, so I try. And they link to each other. But my newer in the last 3 or 4 weeks, I guess, I've gotten involved. It's funny to say that because they don't know me, and I don't think I've ever commented.
Sounds serious.
With a bunch of South African food bloggers.
Really?
Who, and one of them is living in England now because her husband had a job there, but they blog about their South African food, and they give recipes and pictures of it, and this whole different, maybe the same kinds of ingredients but with different names, and then they'll talk about, so it's just great fun. I mean, I'm a person who collects cookbooks. Always have. My mother did. I always have. And I think I could go for years and never cook the same thing twice. Anyway, and I did probably do that for a long time till I had kids who wanted something over again. And now I don't use cookbooks very often. Rarely do I use a cookbook. I'll use the internet, maybe food bloggers, internet or cooking. maybe Cooking Light or Epicurious or the Food Network.
And there's a couple of connections that I'm making here. Number one, you really personify a lifetime learner experiencing the joys of the flat world. Because these connections to soldiers that have served and are serving overseas, cooks, people that live in South Africa or teachers in Israel, there's no way that you would have been connected to these people 10 years ago.
Oh, one of my cooks, it's a husband and wife, they're chefs. They have been living in Arizona and they've recently moved to New York. But they were cooks on a cruise recently, chefs on a cruise recently, and the cruise went all the way to New Zealand. And so they blogged for some of the things that they did there. That was pretty awesome in a flat world to think that was going on, and I could see the food they were
So they could blog from the cruise ship?
Maybe when they stopped, but maybe from the
Sometimes
cruise ship.
I think
they didn't do it all the time, but I think they were, or maybe they turned
I don't think my wife would let me blog if we went on a cruise. Well, and I think we can export your OPML. That's the code for all the blogs that you subscribe to.
Oh, you don't want to
share that? Well, if people want them, they could. And then you can tell me what the main ones are that you want to share.
Okay, that's cool.
So one connection is that flat world lifetime learning that we want, I think, all teachers and all students to really be lifetime learners. And so that's very cool how you do that. And this is fun. But it's not just fun. It impacts your life. It impacts your cooking. It impacts important things that matter in your life and relationships that you have with people. But the other connection is that I think good teaching is a lot like good cooking, because there are recipes that people will give you, and when you're starting, then you follow the recipes. You don't know how to change the flavor by adding a little more of this or a little more of that. But as you continue to teach more, you start to make recipes your own, and you remix and add, and you really have ownership of it, I guess. Anyway, I think that's a neat connection.
Well, that's what many of these food bloggers do, because one in particular really likes a lot of recipes from Cooking Light, and I do too. I take the magazine and I subscribe to the online magazine too. And she will take the recipes and say, this is what I did to it. And, change the recipe to make it her own, and we'll see. But I want to say again, most of these people are anonymous. Some have their picture on, but most of them don't. Many of them are teachers, and maybe that is because they
depends where you're living and what the circumstances is of whether or not you're going to be allowed to do that. So, well, I think there's a lot of neat connections here, and the fact that you thought, I don't know, there are good stories here, and I want to encourage other people to reach out. It goes back to this idea that blog's a 4-letter word, but it doesn't have to be an evil word.
But my friends don't think it's evil. They just think I'm totally out in left field.
Oh, really?
Oh, my God.
So you don't have friends in here in Manhattan that read blogs?
I don't know a single other person my age who reads blogs, and they look at me like, duh. I mean, no. My friends are good to do email.
Do they wonder how you get all these neat ideas to continually be fresh in the gourmet group? Or?
Well, yes, and look at me with a blank look.
Yeah, but
I'll start telling them, and it's zoned out.
So kind of like teaching and using technology, where teachers will start with something that they love and find how technology can amplify and extend something that they were already teaching and learning about or sharing. It seems like that's been part of your learning journey with blogs,
too. But let's say this. I'm not into technology.
Well, hey, you're about the only person I know of who shops with a palm.
Well, all my grocery lists are in my palm, yeah. I've been doing that for many years.
But I think it's great because you don't see yourself as a technology person.
No. Not at all. I mean, I really don't.
But people who hear this story are going to think, good grief, this person, Wes must have come from a computer, computer science family or something, and that's not at all.
And like my husband will ask me to scan something for him so he can email it. He can't do that. So he's coming along.
He doesn't have a scanner at his
He's getting better.
Workstation.
His workstation.
Yes, too.
We're all getting better, but we are not a technology family.
This is all about the content. This is all about
technology. I mean, when sometimes all our relatives are around and everybody's sitting around the family room with a laptop in their laps, all wireless together, but that's
we'll
not
just have
me.
to start doing family podcasts. Get together. Well, anyway.
And this is my first podcast.
That's your first podcast. So,
my last, right.
Well, but I think it's great. And, people, if they want to, will be able to leave comments and feedback, and who knows what kind of connections. But the main story, I think, is just how blogs specifically is just text-based media. We hear about video and all the power of video, but just through the written word can communicate such depth and such breadth that would be impossible to access otherwise.
I prefer the written word because I can use it at my own time, Oh, let me say this about my technology. About podcasts. The first podcast I listened to, my computer's in my kitchen right there. All my recipes are on it. It's right by the phone. It's kind of the heart of our house.
With a plastic cover over the keyboard in case something gets spilled from the recipe.
Okay. But I think my first podcast was Huckleberry Finn, because I found someone, and I got it on iPod, who has...
Or on iTunes.
Who has Creative Commons, I guess, free books that you can read, that people volunteer to read books.
I didn't even know that was
on. And they read them on chapters. And I downloaded. She would read a chapter a week.
And Huckleberry Finn's on there?
Mm-hmm. Really? And I listened.
That's a hard book to read. Alexander tried to read that, and because the English language wasn't all
that's why it was so fun to read. For me and my age and my era and being from the South, it was really fun. And it's a lady from St. Louis who's a volunteer, and she would volunteer, and it would download. And so while I was doing the dishes or cooking or whatever, I listened to that whole book at my own pace because she had finished it way before.
And that wouldn't be a Creative Commons. That would be something that's in the public commons.
It's in the public domain. That's what
domain.
She says. I'll put the link for that too.
Okay.
And then after that, she did a Jane Austen book, but I don't really like hearing it. That's really boring to me. But she's done others. So that was my first podcast. That was before Wes's podcast.
Cool.
Or before I even listened to him. And so that, to me, was a way of I don't like to just do one thing at a time. And so it was a way to...
You are a multitasker.
It was a way to
consume content while you're creating content.
Just like you do when you drive and listen to your podcast. Yeah. So...
Right. Well, as a kind of culminating thought, what advice would you give to somebody who, if somebody's listening to this podcast, they're probably in a sort of different demographic with all this technology, but so they have parents or they have friends or grandparents or whoever, acquaintances that, like you know, I mean, everyone has interests in different kinds of things that they, you know, do without technology or whatever. How would you advise somebody if I don't know, would you give people advice to go on this journey? And how do you think that can best be facilitated?
Okay, I think through. Okay, I'm 66 years old. My friends are, 5 years younger, 5 years older, in that range. Finally, one of my good friends is getting a Mac. She just got it, and she's going to iChat, and I think she's going to join me. She's going to be doing things with me. But the only reason is because her son wanted her to, and because of their grandchildren. So he talked her into it.
To see the grandchildren.
They've been yes, absolutely. They've been PC people.
And that got you to get a camera too. You wouldn't get a camera if I didn't say.
No, I wouldn't.
We had to see
we
you.
Did iChat and sending pictures. I think the biggest motivation, I guess, for people my age having, even using the internet maybe, is seeing pictures of their grandchildren. I think that's probably the number.
Connecting to your family.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. And then out of that grows other things. People who are involved in knitting
clubs or
groups, whatever.
Circles.
And then they learn things, and they get one from the Milbloggers. One of them is a wife that I've been reading since they were stationed in Germany, and her husband was overseas, and now she's not. He's back, and they're back. But she learned to knit while he was deployed to Iraq, and she became from another wife in Germany, another American soldier's wife, and now she lives in I think Fort Bragg or somewhere. I'm not really sure, and I don't know her name. I know her name is Sarah, that's her. But she's just an avid knitter, and now she is involved in knitting things, and she's learned more about knitting through that. I mean, I think anybody can, whatever your hobby or your interest, you're going to find knowledge. You're going to expand your. But one thing I don't think I would like about, and some people could, is just spend your whole life there, and not with real people.
Well, you need
real
balance. You need balance with everything.
As I felt yesterday when I was at the technology conference, sitting out in the lounge, seeing all these people at this technology conference who could have been talking to each other and picking each other's brains and really
in conversation with each other.
In human conversation. We're sitting there with their laptops. Maybe they're emailing each other across the room. I don't know. But they were sitting there with their heads.
They weren't leveraging the potential value of the face-to-face, experience.
Face-to-face,
because when you
always, it beats everything.
That's where our prejudice lies, because that's what we have the most experience in. But just what you've told us has shown that all of these things couldn't have happened face-to-face.
Right.
But if you have the opportunity to be face-to-face, the communication can be so much richer.
I want to say one more thing.
Okay.
This is this website everybody should know about. Anysoldier.com. All one word, anysoldier.com. Is a place, and this is something early on in the war, and I still use it. Anybody can go on, and you can, soldiers, airmen, sailors, marines, sign up, usually for their unit, but maybe for themselves, of things that they would like for you to send them. And maybe they need, like recently I've been sending pillowcases to a nurse in a hospital, because when soldiers are injured, they take the pillows and pillowcases with them as they go wherever they head on, from their combat hospital. But soldiers are there. You can filter it by where they're from, by their branch of service, by where they're stationed, the country they're stationed in, anything, and you can read what they would like.
Wow.
Some are stationed out in the boonies and would like Gatorade and things to put in their water to make it taste good, and would like bars and stuff. Most of them don't want the things that they needed 3 years ago or 4 years ago. They really, really want for their units cards made by children, pictures they put up all over. They want cards, notes, and pictures more than anything to decorate.
And what could be better for schools, And I'm just thinking, the amazing thing about blogging are these connections that are facilitated. So I ought to make a little sidebar link, like I have for Edutopia or whatever, for anysoldier.com.
Oh, and some of the Milbloggers, when they've been home on leave, or when they come home, have visited schools that have adopted them, and go in, and there's some tearful, wonderful connections that they didn't even know. I mean, it wasn't from their hometown or anything. It was just, but I suggest people go there, and that's the best place, I guess, I know to read. Now, you can't just get their addresses off there. You have to register
to do some things.
Yeah, because they don't want people sending
bad
things.
Or something.
And, you know.
Right.
But anyway, that is a great place.
And that segues.
Find out whatever, and I also send them, because postage is really expensive. And you can, at the post office, buy flat rate boxes. And the one I get costs $7 and something, and it's a cardboard box about, I don't know, a couple of feet, I don't know how many. It's not too big.
About
it's easy enough to carry.
8 inches high and a foot and a half.
So you can pack an awful lot of stuff in there. You cannot send alcohol or drugs or, you know, pork products, but you can send jerky, you can send pillowcases, you can send all the paper you can imagine. The weight doesn't matter. You can cram that thing full.
Wow.
And when you think you can't cram any more in it, you can stick granola bars or peanut packages or you know, bandanas or something in there.
And
or toys, because they give the kids toys too when they go see. They give them candy and stuff.
That is great.
So that's a good cheap way, because some people have wanted to send things to Iraq, and
it's been expensive.
And it's been too expensive.
Well, I think that this person-to-person connection, yeah, we live in a flat world, but it's the people and the human connections that, I mean, that's how we learn. Just like Marco was talking about Yodas, you know, we learn from Yodas. We don't learn from the Borg, you know, or just so impersonal. So, and that connects with what teachers have been talking about, where exchange. You talked about the Brooks daughter. What's her name? Erica, and how she was an exchange student, or she was a semester abroad student
in college,
and the value that brought to your life, enrichment that brought to you, and the learning you probably did about London and England and British culture. And that same experience is available to any of our classrooms that are connected to the internet, but it's a matter of making the connection. So these places, and like you said, once you find one, then you can find another. And I think about our teachers that teach internationally, you know, at our international schools. I think of homeschoolers, embassy families, you know, and how about just not even the U.S. folks, of course, anyone living abroad outside of our little sphere. We live in our small little bubbles, but there's exciting potential here for people to make human connections. And the soldiers...
This teacher from Israel didn't write about bombs and all this other stuff. She wrote about her daily life, her family, her classroom, you know, her food. It wasn't what we see on the news. She has a life.
So it enables us to broaden our perspectives and our views, you know, feel like we're involved with people and connect with them, actually connect with them. And in the case of, you know, soldiers that are serving abroad, you know, your life has been tangibly and constructively, positively impacted with all this blogging stuff just through the cooking. You know, that's made a big impact. Think about sending those personal, made-by-kids cards. How much does that cost for a classroom, you know, teacher to have her kids make something like that?
Oh, it's just a few minutes in one day.
Would that mean?
Yeah.
And so these places can enable those kind of connections to happen. That's cool.
And the things that they make, often they'll draw pictures of like rainbows or houses and trees. You know, the things that kids make and write in, thank you, soldier, thank you for, you know, they're really cool.
All right.
And then a lot of times the soldiers put pictures of those things up on their side.
Walls and take pictures of them. All right, so you all have some actionables. Go to, what is it, anysoldier.com, and we'll include a wealth of links in the show notes that you can link to Cajun food blogs, South African cooking blogs, or Milbloggers that are serving our country here or have moved back to the United States. Thank you so much for agreeing to visit and be on our podcast.
Moving at the Speed of Creativity podcasts are independently produced and syndicated for a global audience by Wesley Fryer and are shared under a Creative Commons Attribution 2.5 license. Learn more at www.speedofcreativity.org.